there's basically a practice bulletin that explains what an infertility workup should provide. So if you have a couple presenting with infertility, what are you supposed to do? So if you do something outside of what the standard says, you can be accused of malpractice, even if you have a better outcome. People in policy, people in Congress have started realizing that fertility is something we need to be talking about.
Welcome to the Truth and Fertility podcast. I'm Haley, wife, mom, and a fertility charting instructor, here to teach you the undeniable truth about your fertility. So let's get started. Welcome back, everyone, to the Truth and Fertility podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with Merlot Fogarty. She is actually a friend of a friend, so I'm actually just meeting her for the first time that you all are. So I'm really excited to chat with her. This is going to be a little bit of a different episode because we're not necessarily going deep into biology of things. Today, we're going to be going into policy. So Merlot is a law student and she works in DC, and which I'll kind of let her introduce herself and her work and all the things that she does, amazing things that she does. But she is fighting for restorative reproductive medicine to be in the front lines, to be a voice for it, and to just have our policy lawmakers know even what that is and about it. So we're going to be talking about that today. I'm really excited for the conversation. So without further ado, Merlot, why don't you introduce yourself and introduce your work in DC?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. So I am in my second year of law school at Catholic University's Columbus School of Law, which is in DC. Before law school, I studied theology and political theory at Notre Dame. So I graduated in 2024. I ran the pro-life group there the year that the Dobbs decision was handed down. And so this is kind of when like my Catholic faith was really developing, and I began to see like how a lot of the battles that were going on in politics had a lot to do with human dignity. Like that was kind of really at stake. So I didn't really know what to study at the beginning, but ended up studying theology because of that. And I dealt with a lot of health issues and all sorts of different reproductive things while I was in high school and college, definitely in the realm of like thinking all of it was normal. And this past summer, I participated in the Blackstone Fellowship, which is a legal fellowship for Christian law students through the Alliance Defending Freedom, and I worked at the Heritage Foundation while also going through endometriosis surgery for myself, which was a wild
Wow.
summer, but
No
it was
kidding.
great. I learned so much. So yeah, I'm really excited to share.
That's awesome. Okay, I want to get into your story about your endometriosis surgery because I know a lot of my listeners are going to be interested in hearing about that. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about what Heritage is. Do you currently work there? You said you interned there. What is
Right.
your involvement with
Yeah,
that, and
so
what
I
even
was
is it?
I was just an intern for the summer just because in between like law school semesters you normally need to be doing something. I decided to focus more on policy than doing like the big law route. But they're a large conservative think tank on Capitol Hill. They have a bunch of different sub-centers that focus on particular issues of like citizens' concerns. But I worked at the Center for Technology and the Human Person under Emma Waters. She's a policy analyst. She focuses on the family, biotechnology, reproductive medicine. She's kind of been the woman leading a lot of the RRM fight in DC. And I was her research assistant and her legal intern for the summer. I focused a lot on writing model bills, which was something she was teaching me how to do. She actually wrote or helped write a bill that was passed in Arkansas that has to do with restorative reproductive medicine. So I was learning from her about all of that. She studied bioethics, so I was working on a lot of bioethics stuff, federal health regulations, insurance structures, outlining all of the ways that we can be fighting for access to truly restorative medicine and ethical women's health care, which I don't think we currently have. So I learned so much, and I started my second year of law school with like guns a-blazing, trying to figure out how I could like use the law to actually benefit this whole area, just because a lot of times I think the path is sort of paved for you when you're heading into law school. Like you're supposed to do it a certain way. You're supposed to be going to work for a big law firm, and I'm kind of like, no, I know what my issue is already, and I'm just going to become an expert on it and then sue the bad people. So
That's fun. Okay, awesome. Well, okay. So everything you're saying, I'm getting so pumped about. I know nothing about it, but I'm getting so pumped about it. I was telling Marilla before we started recording, like I'm a mom of three. I have a 5-year-old, 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. I live under the biggest rock that you can imagine. I mean, it's ridiculous. And so I was telling her, like, make things as basic and well, maybe not basic, like we can get into the weeds, but make things just as like over explain things for sure. Cause I know I need that. I hope our listeners need that too. But so, Merlot, why don't you go into your story about your endometriosis removal? And because you're unmarried right now, I know you're engaged, you're preparing for marriage, and so like it's not like you were experiencing infertility for years and then decided to get a surgery, right? Like you decided to do this more proactively, which I think is really interesting, and I'm sure that that's what fuels your passion for the work you're doing now. So why don't you go into a little bit of your story?
yeah, absolutely. I love this question because I think that is honestly the question that every single person in my family and in my life was asking me when I was traveling to St. Louis to get surgery this summer. So, yeah, I think one of the biggest problems that has sort of driven all of this is I think there's so many things upstream of the pro-life argument, and one of those is the fact that women don't understand their bodies. And that was me. So I went to public middle school and a secular private high school in Texas. I did all the standardized secular health class that you have to do, and I had like no knowledge of how everything was supposed to be working. I've always had cervical mucus, but I definitely thought that there was just something wrong with me and I didn't want to tell anyone. So I just was like, we're not going to talk about it. But I always had just really, really bad cramps and really heavy periods. Like I wore a uniform in high school and I would get screamed at because I would get blood on my uniform because I would bleed through, and it was like
Oh
so
no.
awful.
Yeah.
Um, but I also just had like terrible, terrible mood swings and just like really drastic depression, anxiety, very obvious eating disorder, like all of these things that anyone in my life like probably should have said like we should go get this looked at. But
Mhm.
when you go to a doctor, like when you get your regular well visit, I think you could ask like every single woman in America, like the question is, are you sexually active? And if the answer is no, it's like, okay, well, if you become sexually active, I can get you a prescription for birth control. If you're not, then, let me know.
Or even they'll just say, even if you're not, well, let's get you a prescription for birth
Right,
control.
right.
Like that's the option.
You
Yeah.
have acne, here you go. You
Yep.
have
Yep.
all of these things. And so I like didn't really know why. I just had this gut feeling that like being on a pill that was supposed to be to protect me for like not getting pregnant, it just didn't make any sense to me. And all of my friends were on birth control and they were talking about how like their periods are so much better and all these things. And I was like, but I don't know, doesn't the church teach that you're not supposed to be on it? Most of my family didn't know that either. Like it was just very, I don't know. I think there was a blessing there that I was just kind of like, no, thank you. But I started college during COVID, so it was like right in the throes of lockdown and the 2020 election, and I didn't know what to study, and it was just like super crazy. And I wasn't eating and I wasn't sleeping, and it was just like really bad health all around. But I started getting involved with a lot of the like Catholic groups, and the Right to Life group actually invited a woman to teach a Creighton fertility class. And so it was just like your first session of Creighton going through how to cycle track, what hormones go up and down at certain times. And I was blown away because I had never heard any of this. And I like didn't realize that I was only fertile for part of the month, or that there were certain things that should be happening that if I could like show a doctor that they weren't, that it was actually proof that there was something going on, even though you couldn't see it on the outside. Um, so I started tracking, and a cycle mindfulness club, which is part of Natural
But natural
Womanhood's.
womanhood. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they offer these like peer-led groups to talk about all sorts of cycle things, like not related to fertility, just more related to like how can you as a woman use your cycle as a vital sign of everything going on, but how can you also support all of your health? And so there was an amazing woman who was leading ours. She was a grad student actually. And she was pregnant with her second baby while we were doing it. And basically, after like 3 sessions, I was like, yeah, I probably have endometriosis or maybe PCOS, or there's definitely something here. And she was like, yeah, I mean, definitely, but I was in South Bend and there is a NAPRO clinic there, but you needed like 6 months of charting with them in order to get anything done. So I kind of just decided I needed to wait until I was like solid somewhere. And then by happenstance, my mom was on a pilgrimage in like the beginning of my starting law school, and at her dinner table sat Dr. Marguerite Duane, who
Oh
you've
my
had on the
gosh.
podcast
Of
before.
course. Yeah.
And she was like, "Yeah, my daughter like thinks that she has all these conditions. She thinks there's something wrong. She thinks she's not going to be able to have kids." And Marguerite was just like, "Well, I'm a doctor. I can be her doctor."
Amazing. That is
Such I
amazing.
know,
Wow.
I know. And so I joined her practice, and right away she was like, let's do a hormone panel, let's do glucose testing and all of this stuff. So I was like having all of these tests done for several months, and she was like trying to figure out everything that my cycles were showing. I got the Aura ring for Christmas last year, and my basal body temperature was just like all over the place. And in March, she was finally like, "Yeah, I think you're right." And I was like, "Okay, cool, but we can't diagnose endometriosis until, they cut you open." And so
Right.
she referred me to Dr. Young, who operates the Restore Center for Endometriosis in
Yes.
St. Louis. And he actually has done like a lot of studies. He's been doing this for 10 years. So he has pretty extensive studies on the difference between an ablation surgery and excision surgery, which are sort of competing right now because ablation is what the standard of care is in America for a woman with endometriosis, which we can get into the standards of care. This is like, oh my gosh, it's such a mess. But yeah, scheduled my surgery. I had it in July, and I was still kind of like terrified that maybe I was just weak and maybe there was not actually anything there. But when I woke up, it was kind of like, wow, Merlot, it's really good timing. I'm really, really glad that you did this now because like all of these things were stuck together, your bowel and your uterus, like we would have if you had waited a couple more months, we probably wouldn't have been able to do this surgery today. We would have had to take you to a different hospital and remove part of your bowel because it was like completely attached. And
Wow.
so it was kind of like a huge sigh of relief, like, okay, I was right, there's something wrong with me. It's been fixed because all of the bad stuff has been taken out, but also like that can negatively impact your hormones. Like, so like it's something that could still be like a risk. Like, I don't know if I'm going to struggle with infertility still. And I also have like there's surrounding things too. Like, just because I have my endo treated doesn't mean that all of my hormones are perfect, or that my thyroid is perfect, or that my ability to process sugar is perfect, or that my gut is good. And so it's kind of like I did the big thing, but there's still a lot more to do. But it was definitely like I think if any of my family members listen to this podcast, they might argue, but I felt a lot of pushback because I wasn't engaged when I was like planning to have the surgery. I just had a boyfriend. We weren't planning a wedding. We weren't planning to have kids. I had just finished my first year of law school, and it was kind of like all self-researched. Like, obviously I had Marguerite, but I was going to a surgeon who was out of network, and I had to pay for everything out of pocket. And it was all for something that, like, they didn't even know if I had, right? And it wasn't like I was still functioning. Like I went to Notre Dame. I didn't flunk out because of all of this. I am in law
Yeah.
school. Like all of these things that outwardly make it seem like, well, you're clearly fine. So if it actually is a problem and you aren't able to have kids, you can address it then. But I think that's actually like part of the issue is that the culture is set up in a way where it's about like if the woman's body isn't functioning properly, it doesn't actually matter because she's still able to function in life, in her career, even with
Yeah.
whatever underlying condition she has. Um, and so I think like that's where we can get into the standards, like what is it that women's health really is, and what are we trying to advocate for in the US specifically, because we have like all of these fights for reproductive health and reproductive freedom and all of this, but I don't think we really understand like the link between like the declining birth rate and the chronic conditions and the lack of maternal desire and all of these things like actually have they're all linked to each other. And so we actually want women to be flourishing and men too. And we need to be treating them outside of just their fertility and like the fact that they might be a future infertility case. Like I probably would have been if I didn't do all of this by myself. And obviously we have like these great stories of these women who are like writing these, I struggled with infertility for 5 years and then I had a NAPRO doctor help me and now I have my baby. But I mean, think about how many people we could stop from suffering right now, like how many teenagers, how many girls in college who are just like powering through. I think that's something that we should all be trying to fix as a culture. Like it's not really a partisan thing. Um, and so yeah, I kind of just was trusting and hoping that I could get a lot of this fixed before I was getting married. I mean, I definitely like went through a period where I was really struggling with the thought of I might I might be infertile and maybe that means I can't fully give myself to my spouse, or maybe that
Mm,
means like I can't be the thing that I'm saying that I want to be in my vocation,
yeah.
right? And so obviously now I'm getting married and we don't know what the future will hold, but I think that's something that is sort of a part of the story is like figuring out that it's still worth it for me to be healed no matter what my body's able to do fertility wise. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
Oh my gosh. So you're, first of all, I want to speak truth into the fact that you got surgery. Like that, first of all, just the fact that the surgeon, and actually Dr. Young is somebody that I've heard of, and I actually, I'm trying to get him on the podcast. We'll see if that happens. We'll see we'll see if I'm successful there. But he's amazing. I've heard amazing things about him. And the fact that he said if you had even gotten the surgery 3 months later or even just a couple months later, like things would have been so much different. So that first of all is a consolation, I feel like, of you getting that surgery when you did. And then also too, I mean, my biggest fight, I'll teach anybody how to chart their cycle. I'll help anybody with that alongside their doctor for whatever reason. But my passion is getting young adult single women to know their cycles and to figure it out now as a gift to their future husband. Like, oh my gosh, I feel like we could talk about this the whole time, but it is so important that we are looking at, we're not just reacting to a future infertility, that we're being proactive, first of all, for our future family, for our future husbands, for, our future, but that we are also recognizing like our state in life and our what's the word I'm looking for? It just like the way that we feel now, like that matters. And if we don't feel good now, we shouldn't wait until we've struggled with infertility for a year. Like, no, we need to figure that out now. Like now is the time.
Yeah.
So I just think that you are a huge example of that. And that's just amazing that you went through that. So let's kind of you've talked about standard of care a lot. So let's kind of go into that a little bit, because what is the standard of care in like in just in policy and looking at the medical field, the medical world, when a woman is struggling like that? What is the standard of care right now and what we're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to sort of understand the different characters in this whole thing because um like you can have doctors who are offering certain care, but if women aren't able to have access to it because their insurance doesn't cover it, then it's kind of like it's a whole chaos, right? So the two like most important um, I guess, institutions would be the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and they are just, it's all of their members, right? So if you're a member of ACOG, it's because they offer the board certification. So if you're an OBGYN, that's how you get certified. And then they release practice bulletins, which in I think 32 states is actually what is statutorily required to be the insurance coverage in the state. So whatever ACOG says is the way that you should take care of this particular thing within OBGYN care. That's how it has to be done if you want it covered by insurance. And then the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, ASRM, um, they've kind of just sort of latched on to ACOG in the past couple of years, and they both just like release committee documents and bulletins and everything. And it's basically just like outlining if you're a doctor and this patient presents to you this way, this is what you should do. And they use these to advocate for the specific reimbursement rates that the doctors will get. So there's like all of this different, there's like a coding structure that's very complicated, but I mean, I think I have it figured out at this point. I've talked to so many doctors, but the problem is that the coding is sort of it's related to their practice bulletins because the people who are setting the coding are the same people, or the people who sit on the board for setting the coding are the same people who are writing the practice bulletins, are the same people who are getting the money that the practice bulletins make, which are most often funded actually by big pharma. So you can like trace this
Okay.
back to like you can see how the economics is actually what's driving what the care model is in the US. So just for an example, like there's basically a practice bulletin that explains what an infertility workup should provide. So if you have a couple presenting with infertility, what are you supposed to do? And one of the biggest things that a lot of people in the RRM world have been focusing on is the fact that the definition of infertility is actually wrong, because infertility is now defined as a disease in itself instead of it being a symptom of an underlying condition. And so the problem here is if you're diagnosing someone with a disease, then whatever the treatment is, it should be treating the disease. But the model goes from diagnosis of infertility, hormonal suppression, and if you still aren't able to conceive, you're going to be recommended for IVF. So it's like this
Mm.
very clear here, this is what you're supposed to do. And if infertility is like branded as this permanent independent condition outside of any other factor of reproductive health, then it's ignoring the fact that there's something else that needs to be your diagnosis. And so you're able to just skip over any part of diagnosis in your whole treatment plan and just go straight to, well, IVF is going to be the treatment. And so it's like this language of disease, diagnosis, treatment. And if IVF is the treatment, then you that's the only thing that you're really allowed to refer patients to, because most of these standards are actually what are used as the balancing against if whether or not a doctor is committing malpractice. So if you do something outside of what the standard says, you can be accused of malpractice, even if you have a better outcome. And so there are a lot of surgeons who try to operate within the insurance network, and or doctors who are doing even like some of the stuff that you do, even just like taking the time to teach a woman how to track her cycle. But because like setting that amount of time aside to teach that isn't a part of what an infertility workup is, they're not able to get reimbursed. They're operating outside of what the practice bulletin says, which means they could be accused of malpractice, even if they were able to help this couple conceive because they taught them how to track their cycles in the fertile window and all of this stuff. So it's really like it's a mess. It's a mess, and it's so
Yeah,
deep.
it sounds like a mess. So for my first question is then, how does any doctor currently who's working in restorative reproductive medicine, whether that's NAPRO technology or FEM or whatever route you want to go, how are they able to do what they're doing right now
Yeah,
without, you know what I mean?
I mean, doctors are still able to choose like the care that they provide. And I also think that, I mean, I have talked to a lot of people who ended up getting fed up with the system because they weren't being reimbursed for all of the time they were being put in. So I think that there is still a bit of hope within all of these medical systems where, like, you could be a doctor offering this care, and if you're having good outcomes, you're not going to be like fired for having good outcomes. But you're also not going to be making the living that you need to make because you're not seeing as many patients as you should be seeing. And that's going to affect the like economics of you even deciding to be practicing within network. And so most of these, um, most of the RRM surgeons and doctors that I've talked to have just realized that it's too difficult for them to still be making enough money to sustain the practice that they have staying in network. So that's more of what like
Okay.
I would say I know more about just because that's who,
Yeah.
yeah.
So if they practice out of network, they're less, um, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not going to be they're not in that groove of insurance anymore, and so therefore if they're working outside of it they have more freedom to be able to practice the way that they want,
Right.
but people have to pay an arm and a leg to get that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I know, let's kind of move into DC right now because from what I have heard living under the rock that I live under, what I have heard is that I know that Trump has some sort of bill, or maybe you can correct that, but he's got something going on of addressing infertility with IVF. And I know that there's a lot of people in DC that are trying to educate him and other lawmakers, policymakers on restorative reproductive medicine. So what does that fight look like right now? Like, is it a fight? Is it going well? Like, what is that looking like right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, sort of to back up, like Trump made this campaign promise that he was going to make IVF free. And it was sort of under this notion of like the birth rate's really concerning. We want to make more babies. We're appealing to the conservative ethic of like family life, but also reacting to there was there was basically like an Alabama case where parents sued because their embryos in an IVF clinic were destroyed, and
Yeah, I
the
did hear about
court
that.
the court in Alabama basically said that they could sue on certain grounds that named the embryos as persons, which is different than a property right. So it would be an entirely different claim that you would be making. Um, and this created like this huge, like crazy backlash because if you're naming embryos persons, then what does it mean for all of the persons who are frozen? And how can these fertility clinics be operating if there are certain things that are happening and there's no regulation? And I think this is something like just to like pop in a little bit of the legal question here is every lawyer I've talked to in this area basically calls IVF like the Wild West of
Hmm.
reproductive. like law and everything, just because there is no regulation, but there's also no like there's no precedent for having this many, like the ability to create a person. Like this isn't something that the law is able to sort of wrap its head around right now. In like,
Yeah.
which, yeah, there are arguments to be made in all of these areas, but and so that's why Trump promised to make IVF free. And then in
To basically
February,
to address infertility, obviously,
well,
but
it
to
was it
address
was
families.
because it's because a lot of the pro-life organizations have like set their stance as, um, well, yeah, if you call an embryo a person, then you would be able to outlaw abortion, right? And so in like the summer of the campaign, this was the conversation going on. And so it wasn't really about addressing infertility. It was about how can I get more people on, like, to vote for me, because
Mm,
I want to ensure you that we're not removing access to IVF, we're not removing access to abortion, these sorts of things. But then he looped in RFK, and RFK has um, all of the Make America Healthy Again moms obviously care about infertility. Um, but you also have the medical establishment whispering in everyone's ear that we need to make sure IVF, because IVF is the new technology. It's the way that
mhm.
we make sure and solve this suffering of infertility, right? Um, so in February of this year, he released an executive order directing his administration to reduce the costs of IVF, because a current cycle is between 12,000, 25,000. I think 15 states require insurance to cover IVF, but the rest of them don't. And so this wasn't a mandate. It was kind of like, okay, we're waiting. And I think he was supposed to announce something in June, but we waited until October. So on October 16th, we finally got like an actual presentation, like what has Trump been working on when it comes to fertility care, IVF, all of these things. Um, and basically, the proposal and the plan is to make the cost of the fertility drugs that go into the IVF cycle cheaper. And so he used, it's called most favored nation status, basically like the cost of these fertility drugs that you use to start an IVF cycle are way cheaper in like most of the European countries, etc. So working like he just basically did like a business deal with the companies who make these drugs. So all of these pharmaceutical companies, hey, we need to make it cheaper. So you can like buy these drugs now, or you'll be able to buy them from, it's going to be Trump RX. That's what it's going to be called. Um, and
Okay. Why does that
and
not surprise me?
yeah, yeah. And so it wasn't a mandate. It wasn't like, it's very much like business deal that he's releasing. But then separately from that, he also called on employers to offer standalone fertility benefits. So the Department of Labor is basically in charge of this now. And the idea is that you need to be able to, as an employer, offer something to your employee if they are struggling with infertility. So the decision is kind of in the employer's hand. So a lot of people who are on the RRM side are like, well, this could open it up for employers to offer restorative medicine as part of what their insurance covers. Um, and I think one of the things that they all thought was very important was RFK came and spoke at this announcement as well, and he called the birth rate a national security threat and said that we need to be focusing on root causes and restorative medicine. So it seems like there are things happening in the background that aren't being told to the public in these like very sweeping um, announcements, because
Yeah.
obviously the backlash would be really bad. So I know a lot of people who are super angry. I know a lot of people who are super hopeful and very excited about the things that HHS and um, the Department of Labor could be working on.
Hmm.
So that's really just like, if you know people in the admin, you're gonna hear what's happening, and I
Yeah.
guess take
Yeah.
what you want from it. But so yeah, so that's the current state of it. I think, I mean, the biggest thing to just applaud is that we don't have an IVF mandate, because that would mean like drastically higher insurance premiums for everyone, because IVF is so expensive. And I just want to add in here, like, take a minute to like address the fact that insurance companies don't actually want to pay for IVF. They would
Hmm.
much rather pay for restorative reproductive medicine, because
Because it's
insurance
cheaper.
com yeah, it is cheaper. Insurance
Yeah.
companies don't want to keep coming back to pay for the cycles after cycles after cycles of IVF that you want in order to get all of the children that you want. They want you to have a procedure and it be done. And if they have
Yeah.
to pay for that procedure, fine, but then you're not coming back anymore. And so, like, there's obviously there are two different economic incentives going on here, like two different people at play, because the doctors do want you to keep being a patient, being a customer, because the more that you're sick, the more that they get to be reimbursed for the drugs
Mm.
that they give you, the time that they're spending with you, all of that type of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm wrapping my head around everything you just said. It's so interesting. So from what I'm hearing is that Trump's plan that he just outlined in October really was still very IVF focused. Am I getting that
Yes.
right? Okay,
Yes.
okay. So now I say you, and other people that are for restorative reproductive medicine, RRM, are trying to educate people about it, first of all, because I think, I, to my understanding, I don't think too many people really even know about this, like that there is another option than IVF. I mean, even in just the people that I work with that are just struggling with infertility. The first option that any doctor gives them is IVF. Like it's that way or the highway. Like there is no other option. And so even just educating people on, hey, there actually is this other option. Like let's look at the root cause. Because as you said, infertility is not a disease in and of itself. It's a symptom of an underlying disease. And so when you're getting to the root of that, then we can solve so many other things rather than kind of going around the issue with IVF. And so, yeah, so much to be said there. But so what are we doing then to educate, like what does that education of RRM look like in DC?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a very slow hopping on board of a lot of the conservative and pro-life organizations. I do think it's still very slow, and I think there are a lot of people who are unwilling to touch the issue. Just because I would say there's a strand of people who think that anything related to restorative reproductive medicine is just the rhythm method. Like, let's go back to the 1970s, whenever we knew nothing about women's bodies and we were just trying to mark on a calendar. Um, and also that it's a very Catholic thing.
Right,
Like
right.
most of the other Christian denominations they don't have a stance on IVF. And so I would say there's probably there's some hesitancy there. I think it's also just not politically popular at all to be against IVF. And the Heritage Foundation actually did a poll on this earlier this year, and I think you're right that it's really just because people don't understand that there's another option. But it's really okay, but how do we actually get that option to be available to people? And I think that's where, like, I am way more of a doomsdayer than a lot of people. I'm definitely a pessimist, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to fight for things. But I think that a lot of people are convinced that if they just keep writing op-eds and they just keep having meetings with people in the government, and if they just keep, I guess offering the care and getting patients to talk about it, that's going to solve the problem. But it's really like the entire healthcare system is so corrupt. It's not just in women's health, but there's this the entire structure is set up to where we we want to protect the things that make us the most money. And IVF's market is billions of dollars. And until you are able to get the people who have the power in the medical world to actually let these new models of care enter into the market of healthcare, you're not going to be solving any of these, any of the lack of access, because we do live in a country where you have to have insurance to have affordable healthcare, and insurance companies get to choose what they cover and what they won't. States are the ones, states can set the statutes saying what they want it to cover, and people who are writing this policy don't know. They just want to help people and they just want to get reelected. So it's like, that is super doomsday. But I would say, I think that there's definitely way more of a conversation as a whole happening about root cause care. Like the fact that RFK became a part of Trump's campaign, the fact that he's now leading HHS, they've done a complete restructure. Everyone I know in DC has a friend who started working in HHS in some
What is
capacity.
HHS Heritage? Is that?
HHS, sorry, the of Health and Human Services. That's like,
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
yes,
Okay. Okay.
and so like the FDA is under HHS, and
Got it.
all anything related, any government agency related to health and human services is under HHS, like
Yeah.
all of
Which
them
RFK is really like
is,
heading.
yes. And
Okay.
so there's been a lot of like, there have been a lot of changes that are being made, because it's just so clear that chronic conditions are a huge issue and it's something that needs to be addressed. So like across the board, this is something that's happening. Um, but also I think that people in policy, people in Congress have started realizing that fertility is something we need to be talking about,
Yeah.
because like the birth rate is just such a concern. And also because like, I mean, everyone knows someone who's struggling with infertility, and it's just so widespread now. And so um I think, so after the Trump announcement in October, Politico actually published a piece called "The Pro-Life Movement Still Has Some Juice," and it was basically like, yeah, Trump promised this IVF mandate, and they talked him out of it. They still have power.
Mm,
And it was like a hit piece on the people who support RRM, but it it does show that there is still a very strong presence of people who are fighting for this, and it could have been so much worse, which means it can get better.
right.
Um, and so I think this can be separated from the religious people, because the Maha moms, they care about their kids' chronic conditions, obviously, but they also care about the ability of their kids to meet someone who also still is fertile. Like,
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
just about like people have to be fertile in order for like anything that they're doing to mean anything. And so I think there is a wide move of people who are getting off the pill for secular reasons. I think
Hmm.
there are a lot of people who, if you frame this in the perspective of lack of access to healthcare, women's health and all of this, like there are ways to get it across that aren't in this like ideological battle that's happening between ACOG and the people who are practicing RRM. But it's also hard because they have so much power, and the
Hmm.
medical industry is set up to where you have to have evidence-based research in order to change anything, and in order to have research you have to have the money to do the research, but you also have to have the doctors trained to be doing this type of care. So that's why
Right.
like surgeons like Dr. Young, who are doing their own studies with the work that they're doing, simply just to be able to show that like the efficacy of an excision surgery versus an ablation surgery is those are super helpful, but there just isn't a lot to work with. And so you have to there are just so many different avenues that need to be addressed. And so yeah,
Yeah.
I yeah.
So I want to back up really quick here because we've been talking a lot about like infertility and IVF, and that's honestly hugely because Trump literally just talked about it. And as part of, I mean, he, as you said, he kind of promised this IVF mandate. That's not happening because we do still have some juice, which is great. But then I want to ask you though, what does this look like on in the lens of birth control? Because that I feel like the standard of care, as we've talked about, is either okay, if you're having reproductive or not maybe reproductive issues, but just like fertility, menstrual cycle health issues, and you're not trying to get pregnant, here's the pill to fix that. If you have those issues and you are trying to get pregnant, here's IVF to fix that, right? Like those are the two main things that we're looking at, and those are the two main money makers, which is very interesting. So what is happening? Is there any really conversation about birth control not being the standard of care anymore? Like talk a little bit about that.
I don't think so. I don't think this is a
Okay.
conversation that anyone I don't think anyone in policy is having these
Okay.
conversations. Just because I think I just leave it at that. But
Okay.
um I think that the way like you can address this sort of it still does relate to the standard of care because it is the process of like that is the first step before recommending to IVF. But it's not even just control. There are other methods of hormonal suppression that are recommended as the first line of treating. Like if we look at endo, the first like if the patient doesn't want to take birth control, there are other drugs that regulate hormones, which are offered. They're in the practice bulletin. They're what doctors are supposed to offer to someone with endo. And they do just mask symptoms. They don't operate as contraception, but it
Mm,
basically just like if I think the practice bulletin basically says if this is not alleviating the pain, so it's all about the pain, it's not about the treatment. So it's just about alleviating whatever they're feeling like if they're able to function, then just keep them on it, right?
yeah. Yeah.
Um, but then that's when you would refer to, okay, well, let's go see if there's something wrong. But in order to specifically for endo, see if someone has endo, you have to do a laparoscopy. Oh, yeah, laparoscopy.
Love. Yeah. Yeah.
But the practice bulletin actually says we don't recommend this, it's too invasive. And the reason that like that's even said is because the way that they balance um the way that coding is balanced from what I understand is it has to do with the time spent, the cost to the doctor, and the liability that the doctor takes on. And those are the three things that are weighed in every like possible procedure protocol that you could do in a doctor's office. And so obviously liability is higher for a surgery or for even just inserting the wires to try to figure out like what's going on.
Yeah.
Um, so from what I understand, I think that's probably the extent of what I could explain there. I think
Yeah.
that I think when you're talking about birth control, it's more of a you need to talk about pharmaceuticals as a whole
Okay.
because I think there is a move in all like across the political spectrum of people who know that we have too many antibiotics, we have too many drugs. Like there's too much of that, and that's contributing to a lot of these chronic conditions. Um, and so I think that's the only way I could see that conversation happening. But I'm also, as much as I am involved in the women's health conversations here, I don't think anyone would try to mention birth control. I do.
Okay.
I do, but
Yeah.
I'm
It's yet to be a movement, let's
yeah.
say. It's
Yeah.
yet to be a movement. Okay. I mean, we got to start somewhere, right? And so if we're starting with what our current president is focusing on, which is infertility and the treatment of infertility, that makes sense that that is going to be more of a conversation because it's there. And especially too, I think this whole movement of eating better and being on less drugs and all that like that I see it. I saw it starting much before RFK came into the picture, but I think he took that and is running with it, which is great because it really truly is helping us be healthy again, which is great. So but I do think, yeah, this is when you start getting into the world of restorative reproductive medicine. There's so much that can be talked about. And so rather than handing somebody just the load of what it is, serving it to them part by part on a tray is probably a little bit more consumable. And so talking about, okay, infertility treatment, let's go there first. That makes sense to me. But I do think, yeah, there's so much more to be said. Merlot, oh man, I know it's late where you are too, so I want to wrap up, but I know you have so much more information. So what do you have yet to tell me about this? Is there anything else that you want to let our listeners know about the fight in DC, about getting people more educated about RRM and helping drive this movement toward getting that to be more accessible to everybody?
I think in general, I think people who know the truth are becoming more brave. And I think this has been something that even just in the past 3 years, I know that I'm young, but I've like witnessed it because I sort of grew up as it happened.
Yeah.
Um, and I think you see that in the number of people getting married really young, the number of people having babies younger, the number of people who are choosing careers that allow them to be around their families. Like, there are a lot of people who are rejecting, I think, the lies that the sexual revolution sort of sold. Um, it, and I think you also see young people questioning the establishment. And I mean, my political theory brain will tell you we don't want revolution. But I think when you've come to a point where there are so many parts of society and of our culture that are breaking apart, you have to take a step back and look at like what are the big things that we could change and we actually need to start from scratch. Um, and I think one of those things is healthcare, and that isn't something that I ever thought I would be saying if you talked to me 4 years ago, because this isn't what I thought I was going to be doing. I thought I was going to be the person standing outside of the abortion clinic. I thought I was going to be the person doing the door knocking for the next Republican candidate. Like, I was very much on the side of like, we need to be doing this on a single person by single person basis. I think that what I've realized is that a lot of the people who have the power right now are really scared to upset the things that they've fought so hard to change. Like, they're afraid that pushing further is going to take away the work that they've already done. Like, there are so many amazing lawyers here who did so much work to get Roe versus Wade overturned. But
Mm,
that is what they set their entire careers on, which means they had to argue for years and years and years that the question of abortion needed to be handed to the states, and this needs to be a state issue, and we can't be doing anything at the federal level because it's not politically, it's not good for us, right? And I think that we're at a moment where a lot of those people, like those types of people in all the different areas, who have made really great progress, but who aren't willing to do the entire, like, well, maybe the reason Roe happened in the first place was because we have a culture who doesn't recognize the dignity of human life, doesn't teach that being a parent is actually a noble vocation. And I mean, I could go on, right? You have all of these things. There's a reason why certain Supreme Court cases went the way that they went. There's a
Mm,
reason why certain laws have been passed. There's a reason why certain people are getting elected. And it's because of, like, the culture is broken, but
right.
it's and so the fact that now I'm like so involved in this niche area of women's healthcare, I think it's really just a frustration of, I learned all of this and I want people, like, if people understood this, they would agree with me. So how do you do that? Like
I'm
it's
so with you.
I don't think that like tied it up with a bow though. So I don't know. I don't know what I need to like finish.
No, I think that's great. Honestly, it's funny because you and I are very, very similar in that it's just like I know I'm right. As long as I can convince you that I'm right, then you'll see the truth. Like it's just my mom actually joked with me one time. She's like, I think you need to write a book and just call it Why I'm Right. I'm like,
Oh, I
there you
love
go.
it.
My
Oh my
next
gosh.
project.
Yeah. Oh my
And
gosh.
it is really just educating and explaining to people why restorative reproductive medicine is the better option. And
Yeah.
but that education, it like that statement I just made seems so easy. And you get into the weeds of, okay, but then you have economics driving things. And okay, then you have policymakers and you have people in law that are promising something and then can't give that promise. Like there's so much more, so many barriers, so many different avenues that you have to address before you can really even open somebody up to even receiving the information that you're trying to give them because there's so much cloudiness there. It honestly makes me think of so I watched Charlie Kirk's funeral hit or not his funeral but the memorial that he had, and Vice President Vance spoke and he said, I have not been more I have not been more convicted of sharing my faith in in the past years and years since his conversion than I have been in the last 2 weeks because of that movement. It's just something needs to happen in order to break people, to break their hearts open to then hear this information, right? Not at all saying that Charlie Kirk's death had to happen for that, obviously.
Hmm.
Just to put that out there. But that is something has to happen. Some barrier has to fall in order for this information to be then received. And then even when it's received, to then have the bravery and conviction to actually do something about it.
And
Right.
repeat it to someone
And
else.
yes, yes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Mhm.
So I think, yeah, man, oh man, there's so much we can shake up and it's great. But my gosh, this has been such a good conversation. Merlot, if somebody wanted to talk to you, get a hold of you, how can they do that?
Yeah, I have Instagram. My handle is Merlot Mary Fogarty. I also just started a Substack, but I'm I'm working on it.
Okay.
The goal is to be able to share like the work that nobody will publish because it's too controversial. But
Yes.
also just because
Yes.
I think I have this like unique perspective of being a law student who is working on legal things, but it's like there's no place to be publishing non-attorney things that relate to the law. So that is called Letters from Merlot, if anyone
Okay.
wants to. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes below for sure. I'm gonna go check it out. That's amazing. Well, Merla, thank you so, so much for our conversation. I so enjoyed it. And yeah, I just appreciate your time.
Thank you.